just recently I came across following a survivor came, he was a guest someplace. And Shabbos, by Shalashudas, he sat down with people and someone asked him who he is, and so he mentioned that he was in the camps during the war. So the person next to him said, could you tell me an interesting story? So this man became very angry. He became red in his face and he began shouting, what stories? All that has become of it is just an interesting story, one after the other one. And he left. And that said a lot. And I remember years ago, I was once driving with someone who does research on the Holocaust. And he told me also the same attitude. It's just one horror story after the other one. Anyway, I felt very insulted by such an attitude. All right, it's true, it's a horror story, but the Holocaust it's not just one horror story. It killed 6 million Jews. And actually I have no horror stories to share with you. Baruch Hashem, I was lucky. I was never in an extermination camp. I was basically in a labor camp. In the beginning, I was born in the town of Demblin, or by the Chassidim it's called Modzitz. Everyone knows the Modzitz Rebbe for his singing. It's a small town in Poland, not far from Warsaw. And it was, in the beginning, it was a ghetto. We were not under the SS. We were under the Volksdeutschen. There were German business people who were there before the war. When the war broke out and the Germans took over Poland, so they just took advantage. They used us as workers. But they were not cruel. They were cruel, but not like the SS. It was not... initially in the ghetto in Demblin, it was not like any other camp, to my knowledge. And I'll just begin with a little bit first with what I remember. By the way, even though I was very young, whatever I tell you here was confirmed by my parents. When I told them I remember this, I remember that. And my mother used to say, how do you remember this? You were so young. But she confirmed, and my father also, they both confirmed that the stories I'm about to share with you really did take place. Anyway, most important in the ghetto, when it started, obviously I did not know at that time what it means to be German, or I didn't know the whole. I just saw things happening. Now my family was a rich family in Demblin. My Zayda, Alav Shalom, was one of the Negidim. He was the Gabbai in the Gera Shtibel in Modzitz. In those days, to be the Gabbai of the Gera Shtibel in a town, meant a lot. He was an Amolige Gera Chassid. He was a Yita Talmud Chacham. I'm named after him. So anyway, we were like a well-to-do family. But in the beginning, when I began noticing changes, I began noticing big lines lining up in front of our house. And my mother, Aleh Shalom, she was giving out soup to people. It was a soup kitchen, and I didn't know, but later on I realized what was happening. There was a problem, there was a shortage of food. My parents, Baruch Hashem, had, and they began sharing with whatever they had. And there was long lines, and I remember once I was sitting next to my mother, and the whole pot of hot soup, it fell on me. I remember exactly on this spot right over here, and I was burned very badly. And obviously I cried, but that's all I remember from that story. So during the ghetto years, the basic problem I remember was food. And but then what happened was, within a short time, the Germans began making what they call Aussiedlung. Aussiedlung means they gathered all the townspeople. They were going around making announcements, warning everyone. All Yidden must show up in the marketplace, and they decided your fate. We didn't know, of course, what it means, but we were lined up in rows. And then these Germans decided you go to this row, you go this way. We didn't know what it meant, but later on we found out what it meant. Certain rows went to the gas chambers, and others were left over to become laborers for the Volksdeutschen. So I remember distinctly this one incident. My mother held me in her arms, and my brother Yosel, alav hashalom, she held him by his hand, and we were standing in one row. And suddenly I began pulling my mother to the next row. And she apparently you were not allowed to change. And I didn't I didn't know I had no idea what it means, Germans, not Germans, I didn't know what's happening. And I began pulling my mother, and I began crying very hard. And I was pulling her hair to I pulled so hard, obviously, that she eventually tried to cross. And as she was trying to cross, right away a German, they were armed, and also they had big clubs in their hands. He raised his club and he was about to beat my mother. And at that moment, another Yid tried to do the same thing, and the German was distracted by that Yid, and he went after him. And at that moment, my mother was able to cross with myself and my brother, and we made it. It turned out, I did not know B'Shas Ma'aser, it turned out the line we were in went to a town called Sabibo. Sabibo was an extermination camp. And so had we stayed in that line, we would have been killed together with many. Like I lost my sisters, and my two brothers died in Sabibo. And the line we ended up in, that line remained in the ghetto, and my mother and my father too became laborers in that camp. So after the war, my mother used to tell me that I saved her life, because I didn't know what I was doing, but Lamaisa I was pulling her until she had no choice. She had to try to cross, and somehow she managed to cross. Now this is one incident that I remember distinctly, and later on when I told over my mother this story, she couldn't understand how I remember this, because I was very young, and she held me in her arms. I wasn't even walking well yet, and but she told me that's exactly what did happen. Now the main thing that I remember throughout the camp period is hunger. I was always hungry. And not just and everyone was hungry, because in the ghetto, and later on it became a labor camp in the Mlin itself, they basically gave us some bread, some watery soup, and potato peels. Actually, potato peels was a mainstay of our diet, and occasionally a potato itself, and this watery soup. So I understood from later on that this watery soup was really treif, because they used to throw in a bone from an animal and this, so it became treif. But they did it just for soup. But my parents told me they never ate treif throughout the camp experience. So this was our main diet. So people were always hungry. So this I remember until today. Hunger was always with us. Wherever I went, I did not have enough to eat. Now, throughout my camp stay, I always stayed with my mother. For a while in the ghetto, they allowed families to live together. So I stayed with my father and my two brothers. We lived like in barracks, and we had somehow we managed. But it didn't last long. Eventually we were separated. I remained with my mother. My father they separated the men and the women, and I remained with my mother. Now in the Mlin, the children received their own rations, and children received a little bit more than the adults. This is what the Germans did. Now, not only this, I do remember once a baby was born in camp. Now, the mother obviously was pregnant when the war broke out. There were many such incidents that, there were pregnant women, and so b'derech klal they were killed. So what I tell you now, I know from my mother. That the child was born, that I remember. It was the talk of the town, so to say, that the child was born in camp. Now, this child is a cousin of mine. And what happened was, when as she neared giving birth, so the family, the mother of the child, together with others, decided that upon giving birth, they will smother the child, because there was no future for a child. I mean, it was impossible to keep a child in a concentration camp. So my mother decided that she will not allow this to happen. She didn't say anything. So my mother offered her services to be the midwife, because she was an aunt. My mother was an aunt to that child. That should actually to the mother of the child. Of course, they accepted this, and my mother told me as the child was born, she grabbed the child, and she told everyone, "You're not going to do anything to this child. I am responsible." And she ran away with the child, and the child lives today. He lives in Paris, and his name is Yankov Tenenbaum. I spoke to him a year ago on the telephone. From time to time, we communicate. He has a mishpacha. He has einiklech. He already married off einik. And anyway, he was born in the camp. That's a very unusual event, that a child was born in the camp itself. And it was only possible because this camp was not under the SS. Under the SS, under the Gestapo, it would have been impossible for a child to survive. Now, I do remember that throughout the period, even during the ghetto and then when it became a labor camp, many Yidden did try to escape. But there was no place to escape. And the problem was, and I say it very often, the Polacks were very often worse than the Germans. If a Yid did manage to escape, the Polacks took care of him. Either they mustered him to the Germans, or b'derech klal they killed him themselves. So even if she managed to escape, there was no place to escape. Either you went from the frying pan into the fire. There was no place to escape. Here and there someone did manage to escape, and what the Germans did very often is when someone did try to make an escape, so they simply at random killed a number of Yidden, and at one time they had a public, this I remember, a public hanging. What happened was one Yid apparently took some bread, extra bread for himself. He worked in the kitchen and he took some bread for himself, and he was caught in the act. That's a terrible crime. The Germans were very exact with justice. If you're not allowed to steal, right? And that's true. You're not allowed to steal. So if someone took an extra piece of bread, so another he was sentenced to death, and he was hanged. The whole camp had to watch the hanging, and they allowed the body to hang for a few days. I don't remember how long, but it was like it says in Chumash, Leman Yiro v'Yiro, to warn everyone that don't you dare do this again, and because you're not allowed to. They gave us a Musa droshe about stealing food. The Jews are ganovim, and you steal. They could have accused us of stealing the Afrikaner too, but in that case he was hanged because he took an extra piece of bread. So anyway, this public hanging I remember very well. Now, at one time, 10 Yidden escaped. Now, I remember two of them. I remember the tallest and the shortest. They were 10, they were Geboirim. I still remember his name, Label was his name. He was over 6 feet tall. He was a Gibor Mamish. He used to pick me up always like a ball. He liked me very much. He picked me up on me or there were other children in the camp. Altogether, 30 children were saved in our camp. My age, or a little bit younger, a little bit older, but roughly around my age. And he was Mamish a Gibor, and somehow he and 9 others, they decided to escape, and they did a good job too. They didn't only escape, they managed to kill a bunch of the Germans, take away their weapons, and they ran into the woods. They joined the Partisaner, and they did extreme damage to the Germans. They blew up trains. Because I forgot to mention, Berlin was a small town, but it had one thing which was very rare in Poland. It had a little airport. So because it had this airport, the German soldiers used it very much. So what they did, these Chevra, somehow they managed to sabotage the airport and the train and whatever the Germans needed, and they were able to kill many Germans and always take away their weapons. And the German army used to try to catch them with all their might, and they couldn't, because they joined the Partisaner. But the Partisaner turned out to be Polish nationalists. So in the beginning, I know all this because one of them survived, and he was a friend of our family. So he told us what happened. Eventually, these Polish Partisaner turned against the Yidden, and eventually they had a fight to death, and Sovkosov they were outnumbered, and also they were betrayed. They thought the Polacks are their friends. It turned out the Polacks were not their friends. They used them as long as they could, but then they killed them. This guy managed to escape. So he later on lived together with us in Berlin. Anyway, he was the only one to make it. Now, in the camp itself, and by the way, I emphasize this point: the Polacks were worse than the Germans, if that is at all possible, and not just because they killed so many Yidden, but the cruelty that they did it with. They enjoyed killing Yidden, just like the Germans enjoyed killing Yidden. The Polacks enjoyed it even more. And what I want to emphasize to you about this particular camp is, I do remember davening in camp. I did not know what davening is, but today I know what it was. It was during the Yom Neroim. Somehow there was a minion in that camp. Not just a minion. By that time, many Eden became irreligious. They were religious before the war, but once the Holocaust, once the Germans had their way, many people lost their emunah. But that was a fact of life. The tzores was so great that the most common term that I remember from that period was, many Eden said, "Less din ve less dayan." There is no justice and there is no judge. It's a losh. It comes from Chazal. They meant to say it's anarchy. They lost their emunah. They said if this could happen to us, and you have to realize, all these Yidden were Chumme Yidden, basically Chumme Yidden, Ehrliche Yidden, Shomrei Shabbos, Shomrei Torah, and some were Talmidei Chachamim, and all of a sudden this happens to them. So it's and I always say we cannot judge them. Even though they became irreligious, but and especially, I always say, there's a special mitzchus on all those that went through the Holocaust, because the tzores that went on over there, it's impossible to describe. So, but I do remember that there was davening Yom Neroim, and I didn't know what a chazan is or what a balfil is, but I do remember this. A group of Czechoslovak Yidden came to us at one time. Now the Czechoslovak Yidden, when they came from Czechoslovakia, they did not know what a concentration camp is altogether. When they came to us and they were told that the Germans kill Yidden, now literally they couldn't believe it. They said, "What? You mean they kill? They Amish kill?" And not they thought, I don't know what they thought, but they were so tmimus that they were very tmimistic Yidden. They were all killed out. But among these Czechoslovak Yidden, there was one person who was a gewaltige baltfiller. He knew the whole davening by heart, and he was the chazan. I did not know what the chazan is, but I saw one person standing there by something, and he was davening by heart. And many Yidden, a lot of the Yom Neroim davening, anyway we know by heart. The Shmoyne Escher, the Psuke de Zimre, whatever. Anyway, whatever people knew by heart, they said by heart, and people helped each other. That some were able to find maybe a shtickle machzer, a shtickle siddur. So they managed, and they did daven, and they did daven the tzibur. And I also remember Pesach in the concentration camp. Again, I did not know what Pesach is, but I do remember my mother baking matzahs in the camp. Now, how did they get hold of flour and dots? So it so happens, and it sounds odd, despite the fact that we were in the concentration camp, many Yidden still had money. They had diamonds, gold, silver, rings, and so on. That was the fact. How they managed to have money, I don't know, but that's what it was. So B'meila, the Polacks, for money, they would bring you certain things. So apparently the Yidden were able to obtain flour and whatever else. What about the informations? You don't need much. You basically need flour and water. So somehow they managed to get hold of some flour. My mother and a Chassidish Yid together did the baking, and I remember the baking took place in a very, very narrow place, and it was there was no floor. There wasn't really an oven there. I don't know what they made a fire. I don't know how they managed, but it was very tight. So I remember I was mamish next. I was holding on to my mother's dress, and the Chassidish Yid somehow together they did it. And at one point, my mother's dress caught fire because it was very tight. So she quickly threw herself into the sand, and she got up and she went back to work. So you imagine today if you work if during work you hurt yourself, you lie down, you go to a doctor. And this, you certainly do not go back to bake the matzahs again. The moment it was over, she went back to her work. She like nothing, and there were some Yidden had matzahs for Pesach. And afterwards my parents told me what happened was, and this is a very important point to make. The Yidden in the camps, at least the ones I was in, were extremely helpful to one another. So before Pesach, the Frumme Yidden and the Freie Yidden had a meeting in which they decided that the Frumme Yidden who are nizar not to eat chametz, they should give all the chametzdik, like the bread that I mentioned before, whatever else was chametzdik, they should give it to the Freie, to the irreligious Yidden, and they will in turn give them the potato peels, and I don't know, whatever else was not chametzdik to the Frumme Yidden. And this deal was kept. So Mela they helped each other. And those that insisted on the kazayis matzah, so there were Rabbanim, Peter were Talmidei Chachamim there too. Mistama they decided the shir of the kazayis. All I can tell you is the kazaysim in those days were not the kazaysim we use today. They were a little bit smaller. But Yidden did have, look in the Rashi ghetto also. Rabbi Menachem Zember paskent exactly the shir of a kazayis, and people were given a kazayis matzah. So in our camp, I remember distinctly my mother was the one that did the baking of the matzahs. And again, I want to emphasize that the Yidden cooperated with one another. We tried to help each other as much as possible and make the best under the circumstances. Now, the Germans had a minhag, even in this good camp, that every once in a while they simply took Yidden away and Pashut gave them a terrible beating. My father was beaten many, many times. I remember him coming back. He was, they beat him with clubs and over the whole body. And anyone they suspected of making trouble, he was beaten again. My father rather was an activist. My father was involved in trying even to make a little rebellion in the camp, but that idea he had to give up. He learned very quickly that there is no such thing. Today people say, why didn't you fight? It's easy to say, why didn't you fight? Again, you say, Al Toden es chavercho ad shetagia limkoimoi. It was mamish impossible because there was no place to run, as I said before. Even if you managed to escape, the Polacks got you. So they even realized it, and also nobody wanted to help us. The whole world, just like today, the whole world was against us. So the Germans very often took out 1 Yid, 2 Yidden, and Pasha just beat them up. But they used to give terrible beatings that the person was sick, who knows for how long, and the next day he had to go back to work. The fact that he got a terrible beating the day before didn't matter. As sick as you were, they used to have a roll call early in the morning. They took attendance. They were very strict about taking attendance. Now, also, what the Germans did to us at least was, I do remember this, marches. They made us march from one camp to another camp, just for no purpose at all except to make us march. So as I said, I was very young, and for me walking, especially from a few miles, or I don't know how long it was no deal. And yet that's what they made. They made us march for the sake of marching. We didn't accomplish, and then they marched us back. So this was something that I remember. But Lemaise, since we were under the Volksdeutschen, not under the Gestapo, under the SS, so our conditions were much better than a normal concentration camp. And this I remember myself. One day, a bunch of soldiers came into the camp. It was the SS, it was the real Gestapo. And when they saw what kind of camp it is, that some families live together, there are children there, they couldn't believe it. And I was wherever I was, I overheard it. German and Yiddish are very similar. This SS man said, "Sie haben doch ein Paradies here. They have a paradise over here." He says, "We'll teach you what a camp really is." And then this was the end of the camp in Demblin, and we were transferred to Częstochowa. Częstochowa is a big Polish town, a very Catholic town, full of churches. If I'm not mistaken, one of the popes, maybe the present Pope, I think he comes from Częstochowa. It was in case you don't know it, the Polacks are very devout Catholics. And to be if you want to be a real devout Catholic, part of it is you must be a good anti-Semite. Otherwise, it's a chisoron in your Catholicism. So anyway, Częstochowa was, there were a few camps in Częstochowa. I only know of 2. We were in the Warte, that's not the camp, and there was another one called the Hasak, I seem to recall, and that was a camp of thousands and thousands of. There we were under the SS, and the main occupation there was not under the Volksdeutschen, which they were just laborers for their businesses. Here the Yidden basically manufactured ammunition for the German soldiers to be able to fight the war. So Yidden were forced to make ammunition for the German army. Now here a big change took place in my life. Until now, I was always, as I said, with my mother, and very often with my father. I saw my brothers, and by that time already there were only the 3 of us left, I and my 2 brothers. By now, only I and my older brother Sal are alive. My brother Yossel passed away a number of years ago. He passed away in New York. So in Częstochowa already, everything was separated, and we lived in barracks and triple deckers. And the main chilik was this: until now, the Germans gave special rations for the children. In this camp, children were not allowed to be there. I mean, I did not know this, but that's what it is. As a matter of fact, when we came to Częstochowa, the first thing they did was they took all the children. I together with all the I don't know how many children there were. They lined us up against the wall, and the Germans were standing with guns, and they were supposed to shoot us. And we knew what it meant. We knew it means any minute we could be killed. And in the last minutes, I don't know what happened. we were united. I was united with my mother, and all the children were united with their parents. So, as I said before, 30 children survived. Now, how did this happen? So, I found out afterwards. My parents told me what happened. Here again, and how this is possible, it's impossible to understand, but that's what happened. Some Yidden still had some diamonds with them, and they hid it in their hair, in the various parts of their bodies, and they were able to buy off the commandant, the commander of the camp, the main Gestapo, the main assessment in charge of he was the commandant, as they called him, and somehow he was bought off. So his deal was that officially the SS was not supposed to know that we exist. So there were about 30 children in the camp left. So officially we did not exist. Whenever there was an inspection, somehow he managed to give a signal to, and the children already knew, when the signal came, we quickly climbed up till the top of on the triple deckers, and we hid under the cover. Because the SS, when they did inspect, they never climbed up to see, and they came in, mainly when they came to inspect, they wanted to see the cleanliness. You know, the German, in case you don't know it, the German believed in cleanliness. They were extremely clean. But blood, the Jewish blood didn't bother them. But clean they were. They used to go like this to see if there was a speck of dust. If there was a speck of dust, whoever was responsible got it. But on cleanliness, the Germans were extremely, extremely makpid. As I said before, but at the same time, they bloodied their hands with Jewish blood, and that was okay. But dust, that they didn't tolerate. The Mela, somehow this system worked. So we used to hide, we used to climb up very quickly, and it always worked. And I do not know if to my knowledge, I don't think a single child from that group was killed. We were never caught. We all knew that our life depends on it, and we were very fast. Until today, I don't know anymore, but I used to be able to climb trees, and I used to climb walls. I was I used to be very good in sports. So I picked it up I learned all this I used to run very fast. I picked up all this, and I have to thank the German bureaucracy for that. And I even learned how to play soccer in Germany. Anyway, so whereas in the first camp, which was basically a labor camp, so it was mamish mechayev compared to Chenstochov. In Chenstochov, the hunger was felt very, very much, and hunger really. You should never know from the hunger that we felt. The little bit we got, my mother had to share whatever she got with me, because there were no special rations for children. And in Chenstochov, the food that the Yidden got was less than what they got in Demblin. In Demblin, as a matter of fact, in Demblin, the Germans, since they were not the SS, every once in a while, they used to give a treat to children. They used to give a salami. I remember though, I liked salami, and that was a real treat. It was treif, obviously, but at least they gave children every once in a while like a slice of salami. So that was like a big treat. In Chenstochov, never mind, we didn't have any treats. We just didn't get any food altogether. So the hunger was a routine for me and for everyone else that was in the camp. Now I remember my brother Yoslal Fashalom, when we came to Chenstochov, and in the beginning everyone thought that all of us will be killed. All the children will be killed. My brother was about, I don't know how much older he was than me. He must have been at least about 6, maybe 8 years older than I. So I remember when it happened, he begged for his life, literally. He fell on his feet to an assessment, and he begged them to spare him, And he told them, I'll do anything you want. Let me be like your slave. And actually, that's what happened to him. He became the personal attendant of this SS officer. He used to shine his shoes and do little errands for him. And because of this, he had it much better than I had, because he already got his own food, and he was a Yachsen already, because he worked for this Gestapo man, and that saved his life. Anyway, I'll come now to just a second. In Częstochow, now this story I'm telling you, I did not witness myself, but it's a known thing. That's what happened in Częstochow. I heard it from other people who were in the camp, and you wouldn't believe it. Simchas Torah in Częstochow, the Yidden got hold of a Sefer Torah and they made hakafas in the corner in Częstochow. I don't know which camp, whether in the camp I was in or another camp, and the story was like this. The Germans needed craftsmen, especially carpenters they needed. So if they found a Yiddish carpenter, he became a Yachsen. So a carpenter, they used them not only in the camp. The carpenters were allowed to leave the camp, and they did work outside the camp for the Germans. So there was one carpenter who came from Częstochow. He knew where Sifrei Torah are hidden. So he knew of a small Sefer Torah, apparently. So what he did was, he had a pass. So he was able to leave and come back. So he, apparently, when he left, he quietly went to the place where he knew there was a Sefer Torah, and he found himself a small Sefer Torah. He took out the Atzei Chaim, and he wrapped himself with the Sefer Torah under his shirt, and he smuggled it into camp. If they had stopped him, when he came back to camp, they would have killed him on the spot. Anyway, he decided, it was before, I did not know what Simchas Torah is, obviously. The Maisa, this is a fact that in this terrible camp, Yidden danced hakafas even in a concentration camp. I mean, you should know, in many camps, Yidden showed tremendous mesirus nefesh for a siddur, for any mitzvah they could get their hands on. So can you imagine dancing hakafas in a concentration camp? So as I said, I did not see this myself, but that's a tradition that happened in this particular camp. Anyway, all I know is, when I look back to those days, it was a miserable existence. I mean, compared to Demblin, this was a real camp, really. And Demblin, the German was right. We had a paradise. We had a paradise in the other camp. And anyway, by the way, from this camp, there was not even talk of escaping. It wasn't shaykh. In Demblin, at least physically, you were able to escape. Except even when you escaped, as I mentioned before, the Polacks got you. And I never heard of anyone trying to escape from Częstochow. The barbed wire, and also you would be electrocuted. The Germans knew what they were doing. Now, I don't know how long this lasted, but we were liberated from Częstochow in the beginning of 1945. It was in the winter. I don't remember which months. It was either January or February, something like this. And what happened was this. My two brothers, Yosel and Saul, together with many, about a quarter of the camp, were transported to Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a terrible camp. Buchenwald was an extermination camp. It was in Germany. And many Yidden who managed to survive until now died from hunger in Buchenwald. And not only this, my brothers told me what they did to them. At the end, they were hungry. They gave him herrings to eat. You know, someone who hasn't eaten in a long time, you give herring, you become very thirsty. And then they gave them salt water. And they died a miserable death. You understand? Just they ate these spoiled herring, whatever it was, and they became thirsty. And then you give them salt water, and so that's what has to happen. Anyway, it was an extermination camp. So they took away now, the next day, the remainder of us was supposed to be transported to Buchenwald as well. So I do remember until today, they brought us to the station, to the train station, and we were supposed to be transported in those in these cars, and we were seated on barrels of benzene, of gas, and we were waiting for the train to come to pick us up. And the Germans, we were surrounded by the SS with their weapons, with their machine guns, and all they had to do was give one shot. If they had used even one shot, the whole thing would have exploded. So we don't know what happened. All of a sudden, we didn't see any Germans. In the meantime, we began hearing there was bombs were coming down and a lot of shooting. What was happening was the Russian army was coming in. We didn't know that. And suddenly, someone shouted, "Wir sind frei, we are free." And we looked around, there were no Germans. Apparently the Germans realized that the Russians are there already, and they made a vayivrach. They dropped all their weapons, and they literally disappeared, and they left us. And we didn't know what to do with our freedom. Where should we go? It was, by the way, it was winter. And in case you don't know it, in Poland, when there's in Poland, the snow is there a whole winter. It's not like in America. They when it snows, they clean the streets. And the Germans were not up to that for us, and it was you couldn't stomach a walk. I don't know how we managed, but the mice, we became the whole camp. Whoever was left was my two brothers with half the camp was taken away to Buchenwald the day before, and a day later we were liberated by the Russians. So all I remember was this. Eventually, I was with my mother anyway. She found my father, and together with a few more families, we began looking for a place, and we came to a vacant house. And to our luck, not only was the house vacant, in the basement of that house, we found sacks of flour. Apparently, the Germans, they prepared themselves with plenty of food in case it was a war after all. So when they ran away, they left in that particular house. They left sacks of flowers. So I don't know how long it lasted. We lived in this house, a few families, and we lived on matzahs. That flour, matzahs is the easiest thing to bake. It's the cheapest bread, and that's what we lived on. We lived on matzahs for a few. We didn't have to do anything else. There was water in the house, and there was sacks and sacks full of flour. And I do remember this. Among the families that lived in that house was the Jewish commandant of the previous camp. He was a German Jew, and I didn't know what he did and what he didn't do. Apparently, some Yidden were angry at him. They considered him to be a collaborator with the Germans. There used to be a Judenrat in the various camps. They took Yidden at random. They made them like servants for the Germans. So the other Yidden thought that the Judenrat, when we were there, what kind of privileges they had. They were the same slaves. It is as everyone else. It is true here and there were certain members of the Judenrat who, because of the conditions, they also did bad things. So anyway, apparently, one night, a bunch of Yidden found out that this commandant is living in this house together with us. They surrounded the house and they took him out, and they gave him a terrible beating. That he survived that beating is a mess. I remember still he was yelling for help. The pain was growing. It was safka. You have a whole gang of Yidden after who were full of chaos, full of anger, and they vented their anger against this poor man. All I remember him Of course, I do not know the whole story. I knew him as a nice person. And my family also knew him, that they said he was completely innocent. Here and there he did something to beable someone, but if you would, under the conditions he lived on, he did not do anything terrible, but yet that was his fate. The Maisa, he survived. He eventually went back to Germany. He settled in Vienna, and my parents did keep some in touch with them for a while. Okay, then we lost touch, but I still remember this terrible beating that the Yidden gave to this poor Yid, because he was at one time, from their point of view, a big shot. Now, after a while, I don't know how long we stayed in that town. We began this. My parents decided to go back to our hometown, to Demblin. Now here, another problem. Right after the war, there was a very terrible problem. The problem was again the Polacks. There were many Polish nationalists, and they were. It was called the AK. It stands for Armia Krajowa, the Red Army. They were Polish nationalists who didn't want the Germans in Poland, and they didn't want the Jews in Poland, and they didn't want the Russians in Poland. So these Polacks, they fought the Germans during the war. After the Russians came in, they began fighting the Russians and of course the Yidden. So what they did was, they made it their business to kill as many Yidden as possible who survived. So they used to stop a train in the middle of the night and go from car to car, and if they saw a Yid, they knew who a Yid was, they would shoot them on the spot. So many Yidden who managed to survive the camps were shot on the spot in the train. So therefore to travel by train was a sakama. There was no other answer. Somehow, I and my father went separately. I was with my mother, and at that time my two brothers, we didn't know what happened to them. They were taken to Buchenwald. We didn't know what. So I was together with my mother again. We traveled, and we were stopped in the middle of the night. The car was stopped, and for some, I don't know how, they came into the car we were in, and somehow either they didn't notice us. I mean, I think I looked pretty Jewish. My mother certainly looked pretty Jewish, and somehow either they didn't see us or whatever happened. Somehow we managed to make it to Demblin. Now, as I mentioned before, my family was from the rich families in Demblin. And many of the Polacks, we had a textile business. We owned a house, a big house, and the house had a big textile business. So many of the Polacks worked for my Zayda and for my parents. When we came to Demblin, we didn't have any food. So I remember I went with my mother, and she knocked on the door of Shchenim that she knew them. When they opened their door and they saw my mother and me, they said, I forgot that they spoke Polish, obviously. I used to speak Polish, no more, and it's good riddance. They said, I understood what they said. They said, what, Hitler didn't finish the job? We'll do it for him. And they begged that they wouldn't give us a piece of bread. And these were people to whom my parents were so good. And we right away realized that our lives are in danger. And as a matter of fact, so we did find, though, our home was vacant. During the war, apparently, our house was taken over by the SS, by the Germans. But when the Russians came, they vacated the house. When we came to Demblin, our house was vacant. We were able to move into our house. And the first Pesach was spent in Demblin, in our own house. And at that time already, now it so happens, apparently my father hid dollars in the backyard of his house when the war started. And he found some of the money afterwards. So right after the war, my father was always a businessman. So my father found dollars, and I don't know how, Yidden are good businessmen. My father began doing business immediately. Right after he came, despite all the difficulties, he made his way to Lublin, and apparently in Lublin, there was already a little bit of a Yiddish kehillah, and they had matzahs, and my father brought back matzahs from Lublin for us. And also, I must say this, the Russian soldiers were extremely kind and good to us. They used to tell us, show us who did you any harm, and we'll take care of him, and they did. And who did we point out? The various Polacks, who were a bunch of anti-Semites who did more harm than the Germans. And not only this, especially the children, they gave us candies, they gave us chocolates. They gave us, by the way, I don't know how the Russians are today, but the Russians I knew after the war were good-hearted people. They gave you the last piece of bread. They realized what we went through, they gave us food, and they protected us against the Polacks. So that was good. So my father was able to get provisions from Lublin, and some Yidden came back, and we had a seder, whoever was there. But I must say, I remember this distinctly. A number of times I was looking out the window, a Yid was walking, and the Polacks surrounded him and they shot him on the street. This was my sin b'chol yom. But slowly, and at one time you must have heard there was a big pogrom in Kelz. Kelz is a town in Poland. I mean, I was not in Kelz, but it became very known. The Bishop of Kelz. I told you that Polacks were very devout Catholics, and to be a devout Catholic was you had to kill Yidden. So the Bishop of Kelz was a real anti-Semite. He urged, he gave a whole speech that the Jews are coming back, and unless we get rid of them now, they'll be our enemies for the rest of our lives. This is our chance. That was his speech, basically. And the Polacks took to the town, and they made a real pogrom, and they killed, I don't know how many. It became, eventually the bishop was prosecuted. He was brought to justice, I understand. So, but in our town, there was, you didn't need a bishop. I mean, the Polacks themselves did the job. And they killed, anyway, thousands of survivors who survived the camps were killed by the Polacks right after the war. And just a second. This was, just a second. Anyway, and I'll tell you an interesting story. My father helped a number of Jewish Russian soldiers to escape from the Russian army and go back to Yiddishkeit. They were still frum, but just in the Russian army they had no choice. So my father was a big askin. So one day a Russian soldier came in to my father with a sack full of diamonds. I remember I was there when it happened. By that time, I think I must have been 6 years old. And I was about 6 years old at the time of the liberation. And he wanted to sell the sack of, he must have looted the sack of, it must have been Jewish diamonds. He wanted to, he heard that my father is a businessman, so he wanted rubles. Rubles are Russian money. Now my father had dollars. He didn't have rubles. So my father told this idiot, listen, a ruble is not worth anything. In those days, my father had told me 1,000 rubles was equal maybe to $1. Because basically the Russian currency was, there was no nothing, they had no backing. So it was, we used to call it shmatis. That's how we called it, because it had no value. It like, you used it like, you'll excuse me, like toilet paper. And because paper, by the way, after the war was a rare thing. So, and this idiot couldn't, my father told him, look, I'm giving you dollars has value. A ruble, and that guy said only one thing, like, no dollars, only rubles. And he didn't want, my father told me if he'd been able to buy that sack full of diamonds, I would not have had to be here or any other place. Not that, maybe I would have been here anyway, I don't know. I would make an extra few dollars on the side, right? But anyway, my father told me there was enough there for the Ur-Einiklech he would have been a rich and he would have been a millionaire even in America. By the way, when my father came to America, he was a millionaire, but he lost all his money in America. He began dealing on the stock market, and that's what did him in. Anyway, no, what really did him in was, we didn't realize, my father was an excellent businessman, but we did not realize he was very affected by the Holocaust, and he slowly was losing his memory. So what happened was, I don't know if you, or some of you take business courses, on the stock, on the Chicago, when you trade on the Chicago, what is it called? Anyway, you buy on short and long, right? So you buy on margin. So my father used to buy a lot, but you have to pay in every time. You have to pay in. If you don't pay in, you lose what you put in. We didn't realize that he was losing his memory, and he had the money. He just didn't take care. So maybe slowly, he lost all this money on the Chicago. What is it called in Chicago? The Board of Trade. Okay, whatever it is, that's where he lost his money. Anyway, so anyway, this Russian, he didn't want to sell it to him. Okay, now I see it's getting late, and I didn't realize that. But let me finish my. I'll skip, but I want to come to a very important point. Anyway, we got from Lublin, and then just a second. Then we had to leave. We went to Lodz. Lodz is the second largest town in Poland. In Lodz, we lived for at least a year, till the middle of 46. Because we stayed in Demblin a very short, we couldn't stay in Demblin. So we stayed till over Pesach, and not long after Pesach, we traveled to Lodz. By that time in Lodz, there was a full-fledged Jewish community. And there's in Lodz, there's one place, I began my cheder in Lodz. There was a famous Polish Yid, know this, on Zachodnia 66. Zachodnia is the name of a street in Lodz, number 66. This was the Jewish community center even before the war. And all I know is this. The second day after we came to Lodz, I was already in a cheder. Now how Yidden after the war, right away in that yard, there was a cheder, a yeshiva ktana, a yeshiva gedoyle and a kollel, right away, right after the war. And I still remember my first Rebbe. My first Rebbe was a Yid in the 70s, a Yid with a lange board, and he and his sons. He was a gibor yet, even in the 70s. They hid in a bunker, and there were some Polacks who were from the Hasidei Yumas Olam, who brought them food, and they survived. He took a neder. If he survives, he will teach Jewish children Torah. And that's what he did. So he was my first Rebbe. He was a very strict Rebbe. You should not go to such a cheder. But in those days, a cheder meant the Rebbe had a cane, a real club, a cane, or a whip. In Yiddish, it's called a kanchik. You should not know what a kanchik is. It hurts. And this Rebbe, he was very strict. After the war, he was extremely strict. And if you didn't behave, he let you have it with a cane, or I'm almost sure he had a kanchik to a whip. But it's an amazing thing. He was extremely strict, but we all loved him, and he loved us. And we knew it. We knew that despite his strict, he told us, look, you have to make up, you have to learn Torah, so I remember I learned the Aleph base from him, and I still remember, I cannot say mamish remember what he looks like, but a little bit, the Musti Yuknoi I still remember. And the amazing thing is, all of us loved him despite the fact that he was so strict. Anyway, he was my first Rebbe to begin teaching me anything about Yiddishkeit. Now, anyway, in Lodz, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. The Polacks, as a matter of fact, when we walked home from the Cheder to back to where we lived, they would wait for us and very often attack us. A whole bunch of Polacks with them. How old, as I said, I was 6, 7, whatever I was, and they would beat us up. So eventually, this Rebbe, he knew what's going on. He and 7 of his sons survived. They were all Geborim. So they became our protectors. Afterwards, from Lodz, we smuggled ourselves. It was a whole Indian how to get by the border, and we went into Germany. We were going to Eretz Yisrael, but the way to go to Eretz Yisrael was through Germany. So we ended up in Berlin. From the middle of 46 till 51, I lived in Berlin. That's the capital of Germany. And not only this, there was some Jewish community there, but not like in Lodz. There was a Chassidish Rav Friedman, I still remember him, and a German rabbiner, an Orthodox rabbiner, and they had access to the synagogue, and but there was no real cheder there. So my father hired a private tutor for me, and in case you don't know it, I attended Volksschule, that's public school in Berlin. I am, as you call, a public school dropout in Berlin. I didn't graduate. I was about to graduate, and we moved to America. So in Berlin, you should know, the anti-Semitism was gefährlich. And I'll tell you, I remember until today, I studied history. So it's amazing. Right after the war, they didn't, in the history we were taught, they didn't teach anything about what happened. Just about the camp, not one word. As a matter of fact, in the whole history book, the German history book, at one time I spoke German. I still speak some German. I can read German, but this time it's more Yiddish than German by now. I used to even be able to read the Gottesschrift, the old German script. So anyway, in that German history book, there was only one sentence about Jews. All it said in the book was there was a nation, the Jews, they believed in prayer. That's the only thing that was mentioned about Eden in the whole history book. There was certainly no mention of. By the way, years later, I read in the New York Times they had a study made if the German youth knows about the Holocaust, and they discovered they didn't know. I forgot how many years ago that was. I don't know how it's now, but while I lived in New York, there was a study made, and I read it in the Holy New York Times. They said that the study proved that the Germans are in denial of this whole period. They don't teach it to their children like it never happened. And it's a funny thing is many of the Germans used to tell us that they love Yidden. They were there. It's Hitler was the bad one, but they are the gewaltige Oyewe Yisrael. But Lemaise, the anti-Semitism was felt many times. I remember we spent one summer in Bad Reichenhall. Bad Reichenhall is a very famous summer resort in Germany. It's right next to Berchtesgaden, which was the summer home of Hitler. It's the most beautiful summer resort in Germany. It's on the German Alps. It's similar to the Swiss Alps. Mamish beautiful places. So I remember when after the war, I have a picture at home. I was bones and bones and bones. You were able to count all my bones, and especially in the summer when I took off my undershirt, you were able to count every bone in my body. I was extremely skinny. I don't think I'm too fat by now either, but in those days I was really very skinny. And my mother claims, that the reason why I remained so short was simply because I was undernourished. Because during the war, I possibly didn't have to eat. So anyway, let me just come to this point. Just a second. Anyway, by the way, when I came in 1951 to America, we had relatives who lived in Jamaica. Not Jamaica Estates, but Jamaica. It's a terrible section. It's full of drugs and what have you. You wouldn't walk there in the daytime. At that time, it was a beautiful place, there were many Yidden there. And it's interesting. I remember my first yeshiva in America. As we got off the boat, I saw my father speaking to some Hasidic Yid. Before I knew it, I didn't even go home. I didn't know where I lived. The Yid took me, and I don't know what happened there. They taught me something. I didn't understand the word. And I mamish didn't know what they didn't teach. I know it wasn't Chumash. I know it wasn't the Siddur. Anyway, I found out afterwards it was a Lubavitcher Chassid, and I was brought into a Lubavitcher yeshiva. At that time, I think it was on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn, and I did not know they were teaching me Tanya. I did not know what Tanya is, and I still don't know. But in those days, I certainly didn't know. And anyway, it came to a point, and also every morning I had to go to mikveh. Every morning. Is Yitzchak? Yitzchak is not here. Okay, well, anyway, I went to mikveh before Yitzchak. My first few days in America, I went to mikveh every morning, and I hated it. And we didn't have private rooms. It was one big room. We all slept in one big room, and the conditions weren't so good. But I do remember this. I couldn't take it, and I didn't know where I'm going. I knew one thing. I have to run away from here. And I did. I literally, somehow I found out where my parents lived, and I was able to get some money to be able to... I made it. My parents lived in Jamaica for a while. The first Pesach, we came Chalmei Pesach to America. And the first Pesach we spent with our family. They were not frum. But they knew we are frum. They made the whole house frum. They bought hand matzah, and they actually made the whole house kosher. That we were able to eat there. And then, after Pesach, my first yeshiva was, I don't know where it was, the yeshiva of Central Queens. But I don't think it was here. It must have been... In Jamaica, it wasn't Jamaica, so I don't know. That was really my first yeshiva in America. So I remember, I forgot the name of the principal, Rabbi. He was a very good person, because he had come as a chaplain to Germany. While I'm at this, I should mention this. While we lived in Lodz already, Rabbi Lezer Silva Zichrono Livracha came. The American government made him into a general, and he came. He was a gewaltig Oyef Yisrael, Rabbi Lezer Silva. He was such a sweet Yid, and he was full of. He felt our tzar, and he came, and he was loaded with $100 bills. He gave out to anyone he met $100 bill. He had plenty of money on him, and he helped everyone. And many other rabbis came as chaplains, and this, I forgot the name, Rabbi Charney. I'm almost sure his name is Rabbi Charney. He was the principal of the yeshiva of Central Queens in those days, and he was a very nice man, and he did his best to help me. He took me in, and he told the boys. It was, by the way, it was a co-ed school, so. But he told them they should take care. They did. They really helped me. And so I remember Rabbi Lezer Silva, when he came yet in Lodz, he used to make mass meetings, and he used to speak divrei chizuk to us. He certainly didn't give us mussar, fakert. He was mekaref many Yidden who became a little bit more balei tshuva because of him. Simply because he was very helpful, nothing else. I should say this as a gewaltiges Schuss for my father or my parents. Right after the war, wherever we lived, whether it was in Lodz or in Berlin, our house became a center for all kinds of Jewish activities. My father in Berlin had his own Beis Medrash. He was a wealthy person then. He made his own Beis Medrash, not for money, just for a schus, and my parents married off many Yisayim. And some of them still live in Borough Park. Most of them died by now, but they married off many, and not only married them off, they kept in touch with them until they came together to America. And I'll skip over this part. But Rabbi Lezer Silver and the Rav Charlie and others were extremely helpful to us. Now, after this, I only stayed in the yeshiva of Central Queens during the summer, and then my father brought me to Torah V'das. I stayed in Torah V'das throughout high school. I graduated Torah V'das, and then I went to Yeshiva University, where I stayed for quite a long time, a little bit too long. Anyway, let me finish with this. I'll skip over some of the other stories, because as I said in the very beginning, I have no horror stories to tell you. I mean, a little bit I suffered a lot this, but I couldn't really. But I'll tell you what is the most important lesson of the Holocaust to me, and this is a lesson that unfortunately the younger generation today, even though they want to know about the Holocaust, have not learned this important lesson. The most important lesson that I learned from the Holocaust is not to have so much derech eretz for Western civilization. Horaya, that look, the Germans were the most cultured nation in the world. If anyone represents Western culture, it's take any field of knowledge, whether it's in the sciences, whether it's in music, whether it's in literature. I mean, how many Goethes, how many Heines, and how many other famous German writers does the world have? Heinrich Heine was a Meshumit, but he was known as a great German writer. Or Schiller, the Goethe and Schiller are the greatest literary figures in Germany. Or in mathematics, and in any field, the Germans were on top. And despite all this, the Germans, you should know, used all their scientific knowledge and all their culture to exterminate 6 million Jews. So here you have it. Look, despite the fact that they had, in case you don't know it, Dr. Goebbels, he had a doctorate, not from Harvard, so he had it from Gießingen, or maybe, I don't know, maybe from the University of Berlin. By the way, in case you don't know it, in German universities, there's always a professor of ethics. The Germans are very much into ethics. That is, they have professors of ethics. And I remember I heard this from Rav Soloveitchik. He studied in the University of Berlin. He said all these professors of ethics were the biggest anti-Semites. So ethics, if you are a professor of ethics, you shouldn't really be an anti-Semite. But apparently, by the Germans, there's no contradiction. So Mela, to me, the biggest lesson of the Holocaust is, if you see here, you have a nation that was so civilized, and so cultured, and yet at the same time, and as I said before, they were extremely makpid on cleanliness, and yet at the same time, they were able to use all their knowledge, all their civilized life to become animals and destroy 6 million Jews in the most cruelest ways possible. The mankind never knew. And I'll finish with this. No, we have a mitzvah of Zohar es Asher Osol Amalek, to remember the Germans are descendants of Amalek. And I'll tell you over an interesting Gemara in Megillah. The Gemara in Megillah Daf Vav says, Amar Yankov was mispallel about Esav. Al titen le Esav haroshet tavas liboy. Don't let Esav HaRasha do what his heart desires. Smomoy al Tofek, so the Chazal darshan, it means basically to do not unmuzzle him. So Chazal darshan, Zu Germania shel Adam. And Rabbi Yankov Emden there says it means Germany. Germania shel Adam. If you let them go out, they will destroy the whole world. That's a Chazal about the Germans. So Yankov Avinu was mispalel that one of the descendants of Esav will be the German nation, and Yankov was mispalel not to let them go loose, because if they get loose, they can destroy the whole world. Anyway, this lesson to me is the most important lesson that the Holocaust taught me. Never mind all the pain and all the suffering we had by going through this, but to me, this is the most important lesson. And for some reason, the younger generation today, see, you are. On one hand, look, we want you to be educated because we want you to have a parnasa. We want you to have a good profession and make a good living, and that is very important. But at the same time, your derech eretz belongs with the Torah. Your life comes from the Torah. Your life does not come from your college. Your lifestyle should not come from the Chochmas HaGoyim, because look what the Chochmas HaGoyim can do. This is to me the most important lesson of the Holocaust. Okay, anyway, I skipped a number of things, but that in short is my story. And again, I want to emphasize during the whole period of the camps, from based on what I know, Yidden were extremely helpful to one another. Yidden were moise nefesh for Yiddishkeit, and in the camps, to a certain degree, Yiddishkeit was kept, and that's a gewaltige Musa Haskel. And in the schus that we already went through, I forgot to mention, it's interesting to note that today, especially the European nations, did not learn one thing from the Holocaust, not one thing. Nothing. It's like it didn't happen. They don't deny it. Oh yes, there was a Holocaust. But Lemaisa, look, the Arabs are killing us. And they terrorize the Eretz Yisrael. And all of us. And yet, the European nations are behind the Arabs against us. And anti-Semitism is very rampant in Europe, in France, in England, in many countries. So the Holocaust took place in Europe. It's mamish like they obviously don't know about it. I mean, they do know about it, but it's like to them it's like ki'ilu lo hoya. It's like by Paroi, asher lo yoda as Yosef. So here the European nations, mamish, they have not learned one single thing from the Holocaust. But unfortunately, it's not only the European nations. The whole world is like this. But Mele, as I said before, the Musa Haskel should be that the Musa Haskel should be our values comes from the Torah, not from any Western culture, not from any course. Whatever you study is for your profession. But don't have derech eretz for Western culture. If you want to be educated because you want to have a profession, gesundheit. But your derech eretz should be for the midas toivos, for the Torah that you are learning, for the shmiras hamitzvos that you'll have, and that's chus that you'll learn better and you'll become a better shomer Torah mitzvos. We should be zoiche for bias hagoyel b'mheira b'yameinu. Amen.